It's like a very strange game of poker where Zelensky knows that he can always call Putin's bluff. Zelensky will do whatever it takes to keep the Americans on side, knowing that President Putin is not serious about peace.
Ukraine now. Well, President Volodymyr Zelensky is looking at getting members of the Ukrainian parliament to consider elections, presidential elections, at the same time as a referendum on a peace deal with Russia, when and as there may be one. Zelensky could be announcing some of this as the peace talks go on, given the progress that's necessary to make that possible. And the date that's being talked about for a movement on this is the 4-year anniversary of the Russian invasion. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is said to be demanding that Kyiv hold those votes by May the 15th under pressure of the threat of losing American security guarantees. Maxim Tucker has this story now for us. He's with the Times. Hello to you, Maxim.
Hello, John.
Hi, great to have you on the programme. Can you take us through what is being contemplated by Volodymyr Zelensky, first of all?
So basically, under tremendous pressure from the Trump administration, Zelensky is turning around and saying, okay, you want us to do the impossible and we'll try to do the impossible because American security guarantees are so important for us. The reason it's so difficult for Ukraine to hold elections is that they cannot do so according to the constitution under martial law, and they cannot lift martial law because as soon as they lift martial law, half of the armed forces are eligible to leave their jobs because their contract is tied to serving under martial law, and all military-age men can leave the country. So Zelensky has said to his parliamentarians, go away and find a solution to this. The Americans want us to have elections. How do we do this while keeping martial law? And I spoke to Irina Mudra, who is Zelensky's chief legal advisor, and she said that what they're trying to find a solution to is to have a one-off exemption and an amendment to the electoral legislation, which will allow them to have presidential elections under martial law as a one-off exception because they don't want to undermine the country's democracy further down the line.
Right, and for that to happen simultaneously with a vote on a peace deal as and when it comes along.
Right, so the intention is that Zelensky will hold this vote at the same time as a referendum on whatever the peace deal will look like. It's still very unclear what will satisfy both Ukraine and President Putin. And Zelensky, I think, he doesn't want to be remembered as the president that lost the war. So he is putting this decision to the people. It's not the legacy that he wants to leave. I think he suspects he's going to be forced into presenting a bad peace deal, and he doesn't want to be the only one to make that decision.
Right, and just to be clear, all of this is contingent upon Ukraine, Zelensky agreeing an acceptable peace deal with Vladimir Putin. There would be no movement on legislation in Ukraine. There would be no change. There certainly wouldn't be any movements towards a presidential election until there was an acceptable peace deal to put to the country.
That's right, and there would have to be a ceasefire first. Russia would have to agree to a ceasefire, and Putin hasn't looked amenable to any kind of ceasefire proposals lately. There has to be a ceasefire because in order to have any kind of vote, people need to be guaranteed that they're not going to be struck by rockets or drones as they go to the polling stations. So that is the message that Zelensky is trying to hammer home to President Trump. We have to first and foremost guarantee the security of our people.
And so the obvious and ultimate obstruction to all of this is it seems very, very clearly that Vladimir Putin does not want peace. He does not want a ceasefire on anything like terms that will be acceptable to Zelensky or to the Ukrainian parliament or people.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen these strange announcements of ceasefires from Trump and Putin before, ceasefires that are supposed to exist just for a couple of days. And in fact, in practice, in reality on the ground, we feel it in Ukraine that those ceasefires don't exist, that the Russians keep on striking energy infrastructure across Ukraine. So the last thing Zelensky wants is to encourage people to go out to the voting booths and risk those kind of dangers. So they really need a meaningful ceasefire backed by American security guarantees in order to get to that long-term peace deal, which is the only thing Vladimir Putin says he's interested in.
So even contemplating this then, Max, it really does look like Zelensky sending a message to Donald Trump, saying he's willing to do what can reasonably be done within what is right for the country of Ukraine and its people. When are you going to start doing something about putting pressure on Putin? Isn't that the underlying message here?
I think that's exactly the underlying message. It's like a very strange game of poker where Zelensky knows that he can always call Putin's bluff. Zelensky will do whatever it takes to keep the Americans on side, knowing that President Putin is not serious about peace. So he's going to keep playing the game that Trump wants to play because he knows it's never going to get to a resolution where Putin will turn around and say, this is acceptable to me.
Right. Maxim Tucker, really good to have you with us here, taking us through that. That's Maxim Tucker for The Times.